Okay, welcome to today's presentation on the group coaching call. Today we're going to talk about the 4 types of time blocks. And there's actually going to be a few more than 4 types. I'm going to slice it in a couple different ways. So it's also known as how to define your time blocks. So what is a time block? So a time block is time that's set aside to work on a task or a group of tasks that is usually scheduled in your calendar. And if you attended our coaching call last week or watched the video, you know that we can do time blocks that aren't actually scheduled, but this presentation is going to assume you are scheduling them. So time blocks give you a defined time period. So I'm going to say I'm going to work for an hour, half an hour, 15 minutes. It's a container for focus. So during that time, I'm going to work on just one thing and I'm going to focus on that thing for the entire time period. There's also something called time scarcity that we create when we say we only have an hour to work on something. That actually switches our brains to be more focused. So time blocks actually help encourage us to be more focused because of the way our biology works. It's an artificial time constraint. So sometimes we may need 4 or 5 hours to work on something, but we're going to work on it in hour chunks or hour-and-a-half chunks. We're artificially creating this so that we can create this focus and so we can create this appointment for work. So there are 4 ways to define what you're going to focus on when you're defining a time block. The first one most people are familiar with are the task blocks. This is where I'm saying I'm going to work on a very specific task, like I'm going to create a time blocking presentation, for example. The second type of time block are the category blocks. People are usually a little bit less familiar with this, but this is where I'm going to say, I'm going to describe the category or facet that I'm working on. So marketing, admin, email, product development, however you want to describe it, but I'm not going to describe the specific task. What I'm going to describe is the type of task I'm going to be doing in that time block. This works really well if you have category focused task lists to work through during that time block. So for instance, I might have, here's my marketing list of everything I need to do with marketing. So I'm going to schedule one hour each day of marketing. And that allows me to kind of work through that list every single day. And I'm just kind of working down my list. Now a category is, if you're interested in getting things done, it's also called an area of focus, an area of responsibility, or an area of interest in getting things done. Context blocks are about the things that are required for you to do that work. This can be energy, this can be location. Again, if you're using getting things done, this is the idea of a context. I'm at office, I'm at home. Deep work, I consider a context block because I need to have a certain energy to do that. And then we have protected blocks. And these are blocks that we're not actually deciding what's in the block per se, but we're using to protect the time so others can't schedule. So this is where I might, in my calendar, schedule personal time, or in my calendar, schedule work time. And I may not define exactly what I'm going to do during that time, but the core point of doing that time block is so other people don't interrupt me during that time, so other people don't schedule that meeting in that time, for instance. So let's talk about duration. So a time block, we normally think of as just a fixed duration. Okay, I'm going to work for an hour. And yes, that is the traditional way to define a time block, where I'm working for a certain amount of time. However, there are other ways. So first off, I'm going to define fixed a little bit more specifically as I'm working for the entire allocated time, but no more. So if I do an hour time block, that means I'm going to work on my task for an hour, and at the end of the hour, I'm going to switch to my next task, or I'm going to stop doing that task. I'm going to fix that to that amount of time. Now, hopefully I get it done. If not, then I can schedule another time block to continue working on it. The next one is a threshold. This is where I'm allowed to stop early, but I have to work a minimum amount of time. So for instance, I might say, I'm going to schedule an hour time block. I have to work at least 15 minutes. But if I'm just not getting to the flow, I can jump to another thing. So a classic place to do this is maybe with writing. You can say, okay, I want to write an article or write a chapter for my book, and I'm going to schedule an hour or 2 hour block to do so. But I'm going to say I've got a minimal threshold. I have to work for 15 minutes or half an hour on this to kind of force myself to get in the mood. So I've got to sit there and try to write for 15 minutes. If I'm just not getting in the flow, it's just not working today, I'm allowed to then just stop and move to the next thing. So that's a threshold time block. The flip side of a threshold time block is when you're actually in the flow. So thresholds are often when you're not in the flow, or you're trying to make sure that you do something that you might resist doing. An extendable one is where you're in the flow, and I'm going to say, I'm going to work on it for an hour and a half, but if things are going really well, I'm going to extend it. I'm going to extend it up to like 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, etc. And we'll go through examples of all this in a second. And the final one is the constrained time block. This is where we're required to complete the task within the allocated time. If you've ever heard the term time boxing, this would be what a time box is. So the difference between a time block and a time box is a time box says, I actually have to finish the task in that time. That changes how we approach the task and forces us sometimes to work more productively for people who don't get stressed out by that constraint. For people who get stressed out by that constraint, that can actually be counterproductive because it actually causes them to procrastinate more or kind of throw them into a loop. So you have to kind of figure out whether that works for you or not. Different people, constrained or time boxes will work for them. Other people won't. And then once we define the time block, there's 3 ways to work within that time block. One is structured, where we're going to divide that time block into sub blocks for specific steps. So for instance, if you've watched any of my videos on the prep, do, wrap framework, I might say, if I have an hour time block, the first 5 minutes, I'm going to prepare the task. I'm going to load it in my brain. I'm going to figure out where I'm at. The next 50 minutes, I'm going to do the task. And then for the last 5 minutes, I'm going to wrap up and I'm going to try to take notes on where I am. So my next time block, I'm going to be more effective. This can also work for specific workflows. I'm going to show you an example of that in a second. The second way to work is paced, where we're using a pacing timer to provide checkpoints. So we're working in sprints within that time block. So for instance, if I take that hour time block, I might say every 15 minutes, I'm going to have a checkpoint. So basically I have 4 little mini blocks within my big time block. And that allows me to kind of be aware of time passing and make sure that I'm working effectively within that time. Paced time blocks tend to be really good for instance, I will use them for writing things when I want to make sure that I'm trying to like not spending too much time on a certain section. I'll use them for research, things where I tend to go down a rabbit hole and I could easily spend a couple hours doing it. Then if I say, okay, like I've got a timer that's going off every 15, 20 minutes, that's reminding me, hey, the clock is ticking. You can't spend infinite amount of time researching this decision. So time to start wrapping things up. The final thing is freeform, and this is where you're just working. There's no internal structure or checkpoint. You just set your time block and you do it however you want. So let's dive into a couple of examples of how this might work in practice. So processing emails in the morning. So I'll just go through, like, for me, this is a fixed structured category time block. So I'm fixing at 30 minutes. I don't want to spend any more than 30 minutes processing my emails in the morning. I'm not going to let that bleed into 45 minutes or an hour. It's not extendable. My goal is to handle the urgent emails and understand my demands for the day. So that's what I'm trying to do within that time block. And then I have a process. I go through all my emails and I flag anything that's important that's going to need an immediate reply or something that's going to be, I need to prioritize later in the day. Then I go through and I reply to those. Then I scan through and I delete anything that just doesn't need to be there. I quickly go through a delete thing. I quickly go through a file stage where anything that just can be quickly filed, I file that. And then I go and I unfile my deferred emails. So I have a whole deferral system where I drag things into different folders, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, etc. And so if it's a Tuesday, for instance, I will go to my Tuesday folder, drag everything from the Tuesday folder back into the inbox. So that way I can process it. And actually, as I'm describing this, sometimes I'll unfile my deferred a little bit earlier in the process, sometimes later. I do it based upon how many emails are in my inbox. Sometimes I like to clear out the inbox first before I add more emails into that. In case you're interested on my deferral email system, this is just a quick screenshot to show you how I defer emails within my, how I process emails. So I practice inbox 0, and I will drag emails into the day that I need to process them. And then I have a cadence where every Monday I go through everything for this week and next week. I go through every first of every month, I go through this quarter, first of every week, I go through this month, etc. Okay, in the afternoon, I'm also going to process emails. However, this is going to be a little bit less structured. This is fixed paced category. So I'm still going to say I only want to work 60 minutes, but I'll set a pacing timer for every 15 minutes. So this makes sure that I'm kind of continuing to kind of work my way through my inbox. Particularly for me, this is where I might spend too much time reading a newsletter or something like that. So having that pacing timer can help remind me, hey, you've got a bunch of other emails to work through. Keep moving on. And of course, I do work from my important emails first and work my way down to the less important. Cardio exercise for me is a threshold freeform task. So in this case, what I want to do is every day I want to have some cardio exercise. My target time is 30 minutes, but my minimal time is 10 minutes. So what this means is ideally I'm going to go for a run, I'm going to dance, I'm going to do some type of cardio. But I need to do at least 10 minutes. So if I schedule in my calendar, it has to be 10 minutes, even if I'm not feeling it. So that forces me to make sure I'm doing cardio every day. And what tends to happen is if I do 10 minutes, I'll do the whole 30 minutes, right? So that this threshold actually can help beat some of the procrastination by saying I want to have the minimal time. But it's a lower psychological barrier to overcome to say, hey, I only actually need to do 10 minutes. And again, but once I've done those 10 minutes, I'm much more likely to do a 30. And if it's been such a crap day that like I can only do 10 minutes, that's sufficient. Okay, I've done it. Now I get to move on to my next time block. On the flip side, extendable structured context-based time block. So it's a deep work one. So this is when, for instance, I might be working on a book, or I might be working on some product development work. So for me, this is making progress on high context, important work. What I mean by high context is it usually involves me loading a bunch of stuff into my brain to understand what I'm working on. So if I'm writing, I'll go through the whole outline and figure out exactly where I am in the writing process. And before I start writing, if I'm going to be working on product development, I have to kind of pick up where I was, where I left off, and load everything to my brain, load the problem to my brain so that I can continue to work on that. So for this, I'm going to set a target time of 90 minutes, extendable up to like 4 hours. I also set a rule that I'm going to try to take a break every 90 minutes. This a separate thing we can go over about what are the optimal times to do breaks, but in general, you're going to be doing breaks every 80 to 90 minutes. If you can. You can do breaks more frequently, particularly if you're doing Pomodoro method. You're going to do 25 minutes of work and a 5-minute break. You'll do that 4 times, and then you'll do a half an hour break at the end of that. And you can see here, I've got a structure here. So at the beginning of my deep work session, I'm going to prep, I'm going to load my context. So for me, I'm going to read my notes from last time. I'm going to read the outline I've done, whatever I've kind of like written up that needs to do. I'm going to load that context in my brain. Then I'm going to do the work. And at the end, I'm not going to go all the way up until the end of my time block. I'm actually going to say at the last 5 or 10 minutes to save my context. So I'm going to take notes on where I am and write down, what am I thinking? What do I need to do next, the next time I work on this? And this helps me link my time blocks together to create this kind of chain that links them together. So that's a very useful strategy. And then we have constrained structured task. This one is a little bit hardcore. This is writing a blog post. So say I wanted to write a blog post, I might say 90 minutes, and here's my structure. The first 10 minutes, I'm going to outline the blog post. Then I'm going to spend 20 minutes writing. I'm going to take a 5-minute break to kind of refresh and come back and read what I've written so far. So I want to read it with some fresh eyes. That's why I do the break beforehand. Then I spend the next 20 minutes trying to get the first draft. So what this is a complete version of the article or the post. Maybe it's not ideally written, but it's complete. Take another 5-minute break, come back, read it. Again, with fresh eyes because I just took the break. Then I'm going to go through an edit and polishing phase. It's like, let me, remove unnecessary words, trim things up, make it kind of flow a little bit better. And then if this is a blog post, I'll probably spend the last 5 minutes. I'll spend 5 minutes looking for a photo and then 5 minutes publishing. Now, just a note, this is a blueprint. I don't always follow this exactly, but this is the general structure I'll use when I'm writing a blog post. And so this lets me make sure, one, that I'm continuing to make progress on the blog post, and also gives me a roadmap to see if I'm on track. So if I'm trying to write in 90 minutes and I'm already 45 minutes in and I haven't taken my break and read or anything like that, and I'm nowhere near my first draft, well, that's a signal, right? If like it's an hour and I'm not at my first draft, okay, what's happening? So this lets me then take a step back, reevaluate. Sometimes I reduce the scope of the blog post and then come back at it with renewed eyes and a renewed approach so I can make it more effective. So those are some examples of how you would use these different types of time blocks, how you would do your task, your category, your context, and your protected time blocks, how you might do a fixed threshold, extendable, and constrained time blocks, and how you might do structured, paced, and freeform time blocks. I hope this was valuable, and we will move on to the coaching. Thank you so much.